So we're back with Bryan Danielson's AEW run, and we're on match number 41, the final of the Tournament of Champions on AEW Dynamite Grand Slam in 2023. And this match is against his Blackpool Combat Club stablemate, Jon Moxley. Obviously, this is the second time that they faced off in AEW, after the first time where they both, wanted to bleed with each other, and then Rico come out and form the BCC, officially. And then and they've kind of been like brothers in arms type of deal since, which I've really enjoyed, obviously, even to this day. And obviously, the hype in this match was a real big deal going into it. Moxley and Bryan, this is a rematch that people wanted to see, but also in the sense of, both, especially for Bryan, people really wanted Bryan to win the belt at this point in time, as they should, and obviously Moxley being Jon Moxley, this all worked. This was a real good hype and really good build, obviously, with the tournament. The big thing going into the match is Max MJF had recently won the poker chip to get a guaranteed title shot whenever he wanted, basically their version of a Money in the Bank, but not a run-in type of deal. And throughout the match, I will say they do show Max quite a lot, but the actual match itself is pretty good. So, surprised in my opinion, a lot of people don't really like Bryan versus Moxley as a match on Revolution, which I kind of get. I feel like it gets more grief than what it's worth. I feel like people try and say they've got no chemistry. I feel like they have got chemistry, they're just not allowed to go an extra mile. And I don't know if that's because of the chemistry, but I think the chemistry they have, frankly, being two of the greatest wrestlers to ever live, is, obviously there to see by everyone. But in this match, I feel like it's a better match by a mile. I think this match is much better than the Revolution match. Similar to how this one's much, like the Jericho one last time was better than the Jericho one at All Out. This is much better than the Revolution one. And that's probably because it is the second time ahead. I do like, so the match starts up, they go for the lockup and stuff. And, the crowd are really into it, as you expect. This is the AEW World title on the line for Vacant between the two BCC members. And even Regal's like, end of the day, they both got equal treatment, the two of the best. And he says throughout the match, which I really like, is, end of the day, they train with each other all the time. They both know each other inside and out. He knows, like, every hold, every strike, they both know how to counter it. It's really, really well worked, especially, like, in the commentary sense. But they go for the lockup at the start, and then Bryan's clearly trying to go to the ground straight away. He's trying to get Moxley down to the ground, obviously, really, taking into account Moxley's size, which is definitely the advantage Moxley has. And then even Moxley's trying to, go toe-to-toe with Bryan on the floor, which I did like, but, it's obviously not going to work. But then on the stand-up as well, where, Moxley would get the benefit, Bryan's proven to Moxley that he can stand up. He's doing a lot of kicks, a lot of knees. Moxley's kind of faded already, just because there's a lot of kicks going on already. And even in the corner straight away, Bryan's pushing the face to Moxley to clearly try and aggravate him. And everyone's like, obviously they're still boys, it's just a competitive nature, but it's just like, it's like, Bryan's like, I loved it. I love the sense of, it's the BCC, they both want these people to be brought out the best. It's not going to change whoever it is. It's really well worked. Obviously, Moxley comes up, and, he obviously smacks him back, and it becomes open palm strikes, which is really good. Moxley gets into it more and more with the strikes. There's a point where Bryan's got Moxley kind of, like I said, faded. But then Bryan goes for like a dive from the top. I think it might have been his dive and headbutt. And basically Moxley goes and attacks. I forget how he attacks. I think it's a kick or what. He does catch him. It's really good. And then I think it might even been a cutter, to be honest. And but I don't think it was a proper like RKO type cutter, but still. And basically at that point, it's very kind of push and pull, like it's a bit of Moxley, bit of Bryan, bit of Moxley, bit of Bryan. It's more Bryan in the match. The match is like 20 minutes, and it's a lot of Bryan taking the reins with the aggression. Bryan's really aggressive here, and I do like that aspect. But whenever Moxley hits Bryan, it's definitely ironically enough, a paradigm shift where it switches into Moxley's favor instantaneously, as you expect. There's a King Kong Lariat Moxley does to Bryan that really brutalizes it, and then it eventually does work its way back to the ground, and where Bryan's trying to get these holds on Moxley, but then Moxley ends up reversing one of them and basically gets a figure four, because Bryan's it's when Moxley attacks Bryan, he attacks the foot, and Bryan's foot absolutely just totaled. Again, similar to the Jericho one, but on the inside of the ring through the holds. I think it was due to a figure four. And then Bryan's trying to do these kicks, where he does like the hold and then kicks, and it doesn't work. Like, it works, but it doesn't you know, it still stutters him a bit. There's a lot of stomps. Moxley's starting to stomp on Bryan. There's a lot of kicks in this match, a lot of kicks. Even Bryan with the psycho knees. But, and then Bryan goes to kick. Well, it's weird because he doesn't, it's the typical kicking his head in, but he doesn't do the holding the arms. He just starts stomping on him, which is really cool. Obviously, you know, a lot of Moxley strikes as you expect. There was a great DDT, if I'm not mistaken. There was a really good DDT in the match. It was either a DDT or something like a DDT. And it's a very back and forth match. It's not the most insane match. It still doesn't really live up to the hype of... Because the thing will live up to hype. I think for this match, they do have this aggression and, you know, pure persistence, what I do like. But it doesn't really translate to both of their styles. It doesn't feel like a Moxley match, and it doesn't feel like a Bryan match. And I feel like that's the fairest thing to say about it, which is not a problem. But it just kind of, this in middle period, either lean more towards the Bryan or lean more towards the Moxley. That's what I feel like its problem is. But it's really good. The pace is great. The crowd are really up to it. There's a point where when it starts going to the ground, because it's Moxley a bit, it does kind of limit it itself. But then when Moxley hits... so Bryan's like doing a lot more, and Moxley hits this King Kong Lariat, like I said, which is brutal. And then Bryan's got Moxley. I forget how he gets him at this point, because they're doing a lot of groundwork. He's trying to roll over and stuff, and he goes to the he's going to the outside of the ring, because he forced Moxley outside the ring, because the ramp's one of those that connects directly to the ring on like that, you know, screen type of deal. And Bryan's clearly about to do a psycho knee, but Moxley hits him with I think this is where Moxley hits him with a cutter. He hits him with some sort of counter. It might have just been a fucking suplex, and he hits him with the suplex. And then Bryan rolls into the ring, and like that's when the crowd absolutely just goes nuts. There's this moment where they're both doing obviously groundwork, a lot of joint manipulation. Bryan does do the move, you know, where he hits stomps on the tricep. There's this one where Moxley, so this is how Bryan's leg gets fucked. I just remembered. Moxley stomps on his Achilles, which is really looks brutal. I really liked how they portrayed that. And then there's a bit more like, you know, technical stuff. There's this point where they're both upside down on their heads and they lean up, you know, like kind of like that type of, you know, crossbody type of pin, but they're both standing over each other, both on their heads upside down on the ring, and they're smacking each other with each hand. It's fucking peak, and that's the stuff I feel like that's where, for me, I don't know why people say they don't have chemistry. For me, they clearly have chemistry. It's just, again, not a Bryan match or a Moxley match. It's just very much in the middle. And I feel like there's a lot of good spots here. That's probably the most, like, oh my god spot. But like I said, Moxley does get hit. Well, Moxley hits Bryan with the basically the suplex or whatever it was on the top right on the ramp, and then Bryan rolls back in the ring due to the momentum, and then this is where Moxley hits him with a brutal stomp, like a brutal stomp to the head, and the crowd just goes, oh, and then I think he hits him with a paradigm. And no, he doesn't hit him with a paradigm. He goes for the back. He goes for the choke on the back, really, really deep. And like Bryan's trying to reverse out of it, obviously as you expect from Bryan, because earlier before, he tries to reverse it, and then he eventually gets it into a label lock, where he gets him the label lock, he's proper forcing Moxley's nose and that. Moxley gets the break and then goes back for the hold, the choke. And when he's doing the choke, Bryan's like trying to escape, and he manages to escape, and like, but he's Moxley, not fully escaped, but, you know, loosened it up, and he goes to do like a flip so he could reverse it to get Moxley on his back by climbing up the top turnbuckle, you know, but while it's still loosely being held off. But then it doesn't work properly. Moxley still has hold, and he's proper got it deep. Basically Bryan's giving him his back, and then Bryan doesn't even tap. He's out cold, and Moxley wins the AEW World Championship at our end of the tournament. I like the match. I like the match a lot. I do think it's a real fun time. I think it's definitely worthy of the belt. It's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect. I feel like the biggest problem I have is it does way too much show and max. Like, way too much. Like, every 2 minutes, it's not even 2 minutes, every like 30 seconds, it's like, show him MJF in the stands, and it's like, that's just forcing it. For me, like, I love Max. I think he's brilliant, but it's just like, I don't need to see him doing the same expressions. Like, there's this point where they're doing, like, he gets a bit more serious in the match, but it's every time, it's just like, well, what's the point? Either, is this supposed to be a match? It feels like it's overshadowed, in a way, and that's what I don't like. It feels like it's more people try and pay attention to Max rather than the actual match, which I don't like. I kind of don't like that. I feel like, you know, the match should be, you know, kind of presented on its own merit, not just because, ooh, who's Max going to do? I prefer when AEW do the, you know, the backstage where the people watching, or when they do it when it's someone watching on the top. I do like that. I just think don't draw too much attention to it. I think you could do it once every few spots, but as often as they did, it was so often, and I really didn't like it. I thought it really detracted from the match. But I think the match itself was still pretty solid. Obviously, what you expect from Bryan and Moxley. Rico comes down to place the belt on Moxley, and him and Bryan have a bit of a, like, I feel like they're arguing away, because Bryan rags the belt. I think Bryan wanted to put it on Moxley. It is a bit weird, but, like, they cut the broadcast before you can see what happens there, so that's definitely something. But I think as an actual match, it was pretty good. I feel like when you're watching it, even, hindsight's 2020, but it feels like they could have definitely give Bryan the belt here. I feel like, I feel like the crowd was definitely hyped that Moxley won, but I feel like if you give it to Bryan, obviously, bias in this, it would have raised the roof, and I feel like that's its biggest problem, so to speak. But as a match, I thought it was really good. I thought the outcome was, I didn't mind the outcome, even as a Bryan fan. I don't mind it. I feel like it makes sense, obviously, hindsight, but also the Mac stuff was just a bit too much. I feel like they showed too much, but how Bryan was presented here, how Moxley was presented here, and Regal's commentary, where he's, like, definitely a bit more silent and stuff, I do like it. I think it's a really worthy match of the two. It really feels like, a true, like, collision, frankly, of the BCC members, and it's a real good advertisement for the BCC members. Like, even with the Achilles stomp, that's obviously like, oh my god, why did you do that? It's like, even Regal's like, I'd do it to him. He's like the fourth son to me, but I'd do it. It's like, I love stuff like that. But I thought the match was great. I really did. I thought it was definitely a fun little end to quite an enjoyable tournament, frankly. I think the Bryan versus Hangman and Jericho matches prior were really good, and this really felt worthy of continuing that. So yeah, I enjoyed this match. I thought it was really, really enjoyable. Definitely worth the belt, and it's a shame that Bryan didn't win the belt, but again, hindsight is 2020. So yeah, that is my thoughts on Bryan Danielson versus Jon Moxley at the final of AEW's Tournament Champions at AEW Dynamite Grand Slam 2023. Let me know what you thought of the match if you remember it. Let me know what you think of Bryan versus Moxley and their matches dynamic, and obviously, hopefully, we get through to the Bryan matches sooner rather than later.